Good morning. This morning's prelude is a song we rarely sing from our teal hymnal, number 1072, Evening Breeze. Evening breeze, spirit song, sings to me when the day is done. Mother Earth awakens me with the spirit of the sea. Evening breeze, spirit song, sings to me when the day is done. Mother Earth awakens me with the spirit of the sea, with the spirit of the sea.
Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Hamilton. My name is Barbara Wallace, and I'm your service leader this morning. We are not the first people on this land, and others will follow. The stewardship of the original people preserved this place for future generations. We are connected to the web of all existence, and it behooves us to honor these people by acknowledging this connection and preparing for the future. We commit ourselves to righting the wrongs of the past and creating a respectful relationship with the Indigenous people and shaping a future of equal opportunity and possibility for all of us. We welcome you today, whatever the circumstances of your life, in the many ways that we identify as people and in the diversity of how we love and live. In this house of faith, we are included as we search for truth, build community, and strive to make the world a better place for all. Let us begin with these words of Richard Wagamese. We approach our lives on different trajectories, each of us spinning in our own separate shining orbits. What gives this life its resonance is when these trajectories cross and we become engaged, for as long or as fleetingly as we do. There's a shared energy, and it can feel as though the whole universe is in the process of coming together. I live for those times. No one is truly ever just passing through. Every encounter has within it the power of enchantment, if we are willing to look for it.
May this flame be our light of friendship and love. And now let's prepare to sing.
1066, O Brother Sun. O brother sun, you bring us light, all shining around in fiery might. O sister moon, you heal and bless, your beauty shines in tenderness. O brother wind, you sweep the hills, your mighty breath both freshens and fills. O sister water, you cleanse and flow through rivers and streams in ice and snow. Oh, brother fire, you warm our night with all your dancing colored light.
This morning's story for all ages is called Not My Girl, and it's in honor of Indigenous Peoples Day today. It is by Christy Jordan Fenton and Margaret Pokiak Fenton, and the art is by Gabriel Grimard. It's about a little girl returning from residential school. It was as though the wings of 1,000 birds soared in my heart, propelling me back to my family. I leapt over the side of the boat and ran toward my mother. Her face remained as still as stone. Not my girl, she called in what little English she knew. The birds in my heart fell from their sky. I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in my mother's hard eyes. The long braids she had once lovingly plaited had been cut away, along with everything she remembered of me. I had grown tall and very thin from 2 years of hard chores and poor meals at the outsider's school. When I left for Aklavik, I was just 8. Now I was 10. In that time, I had learned how to add numbers and how to read books. I had perfect table manners and knew when to say my prayers. I could speak English and French, but I no longer knew the words in my own language to tell my mother that I was her girl. Not my girl rang out again like the slap of a ruler on a desk. I turned to my sisters and brothers. They just stared. I tensed to run, but my father caught me in a tight embrace. Olaman, he whispered. I had not heard my Inuit name in so long I thought it might shatter like an eggshell with the weight of my father's voice. At the school, I was known only by my Christian name, Margaret. I felt a touch much gentler than my father's strong grasp as my mother's arms joined his, and together they sheltered me in that place between them. We might have embraced forever had my tummy not growled. Luckily, my mother had brought my favorite foods for me: whale blubber muktuk and dried fish pipsy. No more cabbage soup, porridge, or muskrat like I was fed at school. I took a piece of muktuk and shoved it in my mouth. I chewed and chewed it and tried to wrestle the rubbery chunk down, but my throat closed and my stomach turned. I had to spit it out. I followed my family home silently. As they honked away like a gaggle of geese, I wondered what kind of bird I had become. I no longer felt like I belonged to this flock. As we neared our tent, I caught sight of my father's sled dogs. I ran eagerly toward one, but she sprang at me with a fierce snap. Wait until you wear our scent again, Olaman, my father said, reassuring me with the English he had learned as a boy at the outsider's school. My first few weeks at home were difficult. I could not eat the food my mother prepared. I relied on my father to translate almost everything. And I had lost the skills I needed to be useful. I couldn't set traps, skin hares, or pluck geese. I knew how to recite verses and make my bed, but those things did not help feed the family. I wished my older sister had not moved away. She had been to the outsider's school. She would have understood how hard it was to return home a stranger. One day, after I tangled a fishing net, my mother gestured for me to go play. My sisters had caught many fish, and I was jealous. Then my mother placed her ulu in my hands. She guided the knife up the fish's belly, patiently showing me how to gut it. That night, as I reached for a piece of fish, I thought for a moment how embarrassed I would be if the nuns could see me eating with my hands. But I was proud that I had helped prepare the fish, and it had been a long while since we had a meal I could eat, so I gorged myself. One day, my father asked me to join him on a hunting trip. I was ecstatic. I loved traveling by dog sled. We were far out on the barren tundra when my father asked, Olaman, do you know the dog commands? Yes, I said confidently. Gi means go right and left is ha. He laughed, hopping off and leaving me in command. The dogs were moving fast and my heart was racing. Ha! I called excitedly, meaning to avoid the pond on the left, but I had confused my commands. The dogs went toward the pond. Gee, gee, I shouted. The dogs bolted sharply right. Ha, ha, I countered. They darted so quickly left, I nearly fell off the sled. Panicked, I repeated, ha, ha. My command tamed the line into a tight coil that slowed to a gradual stop. Atta girl, Alamon, my father shouted. As we rode back to town, I felt proud standing ahead of him on the runners. I was sure he was proud too. He let me drive more often after that. On Christmas morning, I awoke to the smell of bannock. My father sat like Santa with a load of presents. He gave my brother a train and my sister beautiful porcelain dolls. There was nothing for me. I cried. I had tried so hard, but I did not belong. What's wrong? My father asked. I wanted a doll, I sobbed. I thought you were too old for dolls, he teased. Maybe you're not big enough for your own dog sled. My own dog sled? I ran outside to find 6 dogs hitched to a new sled. I hopped on and drove around and around town. Beneath the dancing northern lights, I passed by Agnes, my friend, and her mother. At that speed, I could not see their expressions, but they both waved and cheered. And that's the end of this morning's story.
This morning's words for contemplation come from Richard Wagamis. After those words, there will be a moment for silence and reflection, and then we'll do some chanting together. This is from his book, Embers. I am my silence. I am not the busyness of my thoughts or the daily rhythm of my actions. I am not the stuff that constitutes my world. I am not my talk. I am not my actions. I am my silence. I am the consciousness that perceives all these things. When I go to my consciousness, to that great pool of silence that observes the intricacies of my life, I am aware that I am me. I take a little time each day to sit in silence so that I can move outward in balance into the great clamor of living.
Humbly we walk here, humbly we sing here, humbly we bless this land. Humbly we walk here,
with
humbly we
gratitude,
sing here,
remember
humbly we
the
bless
ancient ones who
this
walked this
land.
land.
Humbly we walk here,
with
humbly we
gratitude,
sing here,
remember
humbly we
the
bless
ancient ones
this
who walked this
land.
land.
Humbly we walk here,
with
humbly we
gratitude,
sing here,
remember
humbly we
the
bless
ancient ones
this
who walked this
land.
land.
Humbly we walk here,
with
humbly we
gratitude,
sing here,
remember
humbly we
the
bless
ancient ones
this
who walked this
land.
land.
Humbly we walk here,
with
humbly we
gratitude,
sing here,
remember
humbly we
the
bless
ancient ones
this
who walked this
land.
land.
On this day, when we bring our thoughts to Indigenous people, we also are aware that we continue in Pride Month and that we are honoring fathers today for their role in our lives. My parents encouraged me to be curious and to try out new things. And that went on even when those things I wanted to try were perhaps, in my parents' opinion, not in my best interest. I'm not talking about drugs or anything like that. I wasn't quite that brave as a child, but it was more things like taking solo road trips when I was a teenager, going out into the wilderness and going hiking and camping by myself, making friends with people who were different, or following my instincts when I made decisions. And I think that was a result of them perhaps wanting me to think bigger than they had been encouraged to do when they were young, although both of them had pursued their dreams in their lives as well. That background, I think, helps explain why earlier this year, when I learned that the Canadian Unitarian Council, the CUC, was forming a practice group to continue learning about the Truth, Healing, and Reconciliation initiative that was started a couple of years ago, I applied to participate. The facilitated group of 8 Unitarians, we were going to learn together, reflect, journal, and take action to continue our learning journey about Canada's Indigenous populations. I'd learned so much from those earlier THR, Truth, Healing, and Reconciliation sessions, and I was challenged by this opportunity to do more personal reflection and to share that experience with other UUs. We have periodic online learning sessions, we listen to speakers, we have discussions, and we have journaling assignments. We work with a partner and a mentor to gain insight and learn and be held accountable. Today, as you know, is Indigenous Peoples Day, a time set aside specifically to acknowledge the presence and contributions of Native people, to celebrate Indigenous culture and art and language and ways of life. It's a time to celebrate the beauty and richness of the lives of the land's first people, and to acknowledge that the richness they have contributed to our existence is still here and still nurturing us today. Ironically, this morning as I was driving to the church, I was listening to CBC, and a Native elder, and I do apologize that I did not catch his name, said in response to celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day, "Celebrate? Why should we celebrate? We have to keep dodging bullets." In a statement that was just released from our own Canadian Unitarian Council's National Voice team, they addressed issues of police violence against Indigenous people, and they started the letter with this. In 2020, more Indigenous people have died as a direct result of their interactions with Canadian police forces. Most recently, the deaths of Chantal Moore and Rodney Levy in New Brunswick, with Aisha Hudson, Jason Collins, and Stuart Kevin Andrews in Winnipeg, have illustrated the tragic results of the systemic oppressions and discrimination within our social and justice systems. You know, in that environment, it's really not hard to understand that elder's frustration. Celebrate indeed. When we as a nation cannot seem to stem the violence against the people of our First Nations, when we cannot make the effort to assure that the people have adequate housing and food security and clean water, even when they live on reservation land, when we cannot stop the millions of acts of overt and subtle racism that Indigenous people experience in every interaction with government and social welfare and community institutions, as well as from individuals and one-on-one. The CUC's statement is specifically focused on calling for action in the nation's various police forces to eliminate systemic racism and violence within their interactions with Indigenous and other peoples of color. It's a place to stop the bleeding, so to speak, that is a result of years of oppression, systemic white supremacy, and racism. But we know this. You all know this. And we know it needs to stop. What we don't always know is how to make it stop. We've seen people speaking out and protesting, calling for change. And we know that stopping police violence is only a very small first step in the many ways that need to be changed and steps that need to be taken to show that Indigenous lives matter, that Black lives matter. Frankly, we don't know the truth of the history of how we got to where we are today in our relationships between communities within communities. We're only beginning to find the ways to truly and deeply listen and hear each other's stories, to question the status quo, and to seek ways of change. To start to understand the time and the effort and the dedication and the commitment that it's really going to take if we want to repair the damage of the past and find a way to the future. To make sure that the voices calling for change are actually heard, that something follows beyond just screaming at one another. And for those of us who benefit from privilege, to learn how to use our power to facilitate change. We've enjoyed lots of benefits. Now we may have to pay some prices. Participating in this practice group has been quite profound for me. In a time when I'm not in contact with so many other people, I have this group of 10 people that I'm talking with on a regular basis, and very deeply and very intimately. I wanted to talk today a bit about that experience. I want to remind you that coming from the United States to Canada, I didn't know much about Canada's history with Indigenous people. I didn't know much about the US's history with Indigenous people either. I think it's a common part of our school system that we just have ignored a lot of those things. But what I'd seen previously when I'd visited in Canada was, to me, an embrace of Native culture and art. And most of that I'd seen when we'd visited British Columbia, because that's where we went the most often. And seeing that impressed me a great deal because, again, in the United States, we didn't see a spotlight on Native people except casinos. And that didn't seem so much Native cultural appreciation as potentially making a profit off the larger white community's vulnerability to greed, which frankly, in some ways seemed only fair to me after years of our exploitation and imposition of poverty and oppression on Native folks. So what has opened my eyes and my mind and my heart over these last few months of listening and reflecting and getting feedback from my peers and mentors? Well, let me share a couple of things that are changing the way I'm seeing the world and are going to impact how I choose to act. One night, we were joined by Nigan Sinclair. He's a columnist in the Winnipeg Free Press, but he's also a professor at the University of Winnipeg. And in his 90-minute presentation, he shared a brief but incredibly comprehensive history of the relationship between colonizers, settlers, and First Nations, including the development of treaties and understandings for how the nations were supposed to respect and interact with one another. That talk is available to view at the CUC's website. It was truly eye-opening, since this history is not something that I'm familiar with, but am eager to know more of. At the end of his conversation with us, the question he posed was, how are we going to share the land? Now, it's not a big, long question, but it is a big and deep and important one, because people have such different views of the meaning and the use of the land, as well as vastly different relationships with the land and the animals and the resources and nature. People have different interests in how the land is used and divvied up and stewarded and kept. He shared a viewpoint that post-COVID-19, there will be an effort to restart the economy according to old patterns and methods and blind spots. That this will be a time of great turmoil, maybe even an attempt to quash even more Indigenous rights, especially for those who see this time as an opportunity to shape the future into something new, sustainable, respectful, dynamic, and diverse. As he notes, we all will come to an agreement if we make the commitments it takes to listen and stay in the room with one another and work to demonstrate that our actions about what we want are congruent with our words, and that we are here to really work on creating change. It's going to take respect and patience and a suspension of our certainty that we know it's right. We're going to confront the dynamics of power and judgment, worthiness, purpose, money, race, cultural systems, institutions. All of these are going to need to be examined and reevaluated in light of what it is we say we want to create, the vision of the society that we say we want to live in and provide to one another. It seems like a daunting undertaking, and it is, but it's no less acceptable if we want to honor all of Earth's interconnected web. Another speaker we heard from, an elder matriarch from Vancouver, was Sharon Jinkerson Brass. To me, the most profound thing I heard this wise woman say during her conversation with us was, we are here to bring We are here to bring beauty into the earth. We are here to bring beauty into the earth. Wow. Not wealth, not cars, not power. She spoke of this creativity and generativity that is a part of every person, that the concept of artist is not reserved for a select few, but is a part of the life of every person in dance, in the activities of daily life, in creating connection and community, in drawing and relationship, in everything we do. We are here to create beauty. Art is not separate from life. Beauty is a form of bringing new life forward, of being a creator within one's own life. As each of us does our personal work of healing and restoration to wholeness, we are creating more beauty in the world. And when we know ourselves to be creators and we see the beauty in that, we don't need to appropriate things from other cultures or other people, because we can make it up as we go along and know that it will be good. If our goal is not beauty, but power, let's say, we find ourselves in struggle and controversy. She told us that we are meant to enjoy our time here together. Things that impede that are problematic because they separate us from feeling safe and whole, in harmony, and as though life as we live it is enough. They keep us from beauty, harmony, and living with a good mind, a good heart. Participating in this circle and reflecting and learning have opened my heart and mind in new ways, which to me is a blessing. Go back to that earlier curiosity. It's also a call to action, to take what I know and who I am and get into making change happen. I listened to a wonderful program of Indigenous folks yesterday who are involved in the Stratford Theatre Company. Jessica Carmichael, who's an actor and identifies as Indigenous, responded to a question: when is the time to speak? And she says, the time to speak is now, even when it is hard and you are afraid. If you value the relationship between people and communities, and you want to create greater harmony and beauty, then what you do shows how you truly do value others and the relationship. Or if you don't. We can choose caring and kindness and deep empathy. We can call out bad behavior and oppression and power imbalance. We can learn differently. We can demand that all voices be at the table, and we can take the first steps in our own liberation and our own return to wholeness in service to the liberation and wholeness of the world. May it be so. Blessed be.
1058, Be Ours a Religion, and I'll sing through it twice. Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere. Its temple of space, its shrine a good heart, its cradle truth, its ritual works of love. Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere, its temple of space, its shrine the good heart, its cradle truth, its ritual works of love.
We close with these words from Sarah York. We receive fragments of holiness, glimpse of eternity. Brief moments of insight. Let us gather them up for the precious gifts that they are, and renewed by their grace, move boldly into the unknown.
Good morning. Happy Father's Day and happy solstice. And this is by Stevie Wonder. Like a long and lonely stream, I keep running toward a dream. Moving on, moving on. And like a branch on a tree, I keep reaching to be free. Moving on, moving on. 'Cause there's a place in the sun where there's hope for everyone, where my poor restless heart gotta run. There's a place in the sun, and before my life is done, got to find me a place in the sun. Like an old and dusty road, I get weary from the road. Moving on, moving on. And like this tired and troubled earth, I've been a-rolling since my birth. Moving on, moving on. 'Cause there's a place in the sun where there's hope for everyone, where my poor restless heart gotta run. There's a place in the sun, and before my life is done, got to find me a place in the sun. 'Cause there's a place in the sun where there's hope for everyone, where my poor restless heart gotta run. There's a place in the sun, and before my life is done, got to find me a place in the sun. Got to find me a place in the sun. Thank you.
Yes, we've got a couple of announcements this morning. The first one is from Blooms for Africa. With the wonderful support of our congregation, both in accumulating steps as you virtually walk to Uganda and in making generous donations to the Stephen Lewis Foundation, Blooms has had the most successful fundraising event since we began. 46 walkers covered almost 12,000 kilometers over 31 days. And to date, we have raised, ready for this, $22,046. Isn't that amazing? Wow. As African countries are dealing with both AIDS and the COVID virus, receiving this money will be a blessing for the grandmothers who are working diligently beside the other community support groups in all facets of prevention, education, and caring for people who are struggling with these diseases. The members of Blooms are grateful for your generosity. And this other announcement, the 6-minute memoirs last night were attended by more than 260 households and generated another good amount, $5,400 in income so far. I know there was a difficulty with the donation button, but I know it's been fixed now, so you could go and, if you hadn't donated yet, you could certainly donate some more money today. This will be shared between the church and Empowerment Squared, whose works with Black community is so important in Hamilton and in the world. More donations are still welcome, and though it is a struggle getting the website working properly, but as I said, I understand it's working now. Despite a few technical glitches, the evening was a great success. Stories both moving and amusing kept our guests enthralled. Congratulations to Ann Bachma, the host and organizer extraordinaire, and to Bruce McPherson and Catherine Schiller, who handled the technical side. Wonderful evening. Thanks, and those are our announcements for today.